Yeah.
Wow. Good for you, John. There's no way.
My wife who watches this from home points out that on the camera you can only see the front row, and so it always looks like it's empty.
And then when you share your screen, like the speakers like a little kind of longer. But you guys can see it, so
Sure.
Hey, we're on the delay.
All right, now we're live streaming.
So Graham,
Okay.
so when you go to share your screen, make show both of those.
Okay, optimize.
And then when you share.
Yeah.
This one. When you start your slideshow,
Right.
it'll be right there at the full screen.
Okay, so it's sharing now.
Mhm.
Okay, so we can turn that on.
Yeah.
So then they can see me. Full screen initially.
Yeah.
And then I'll turn it on.
Yep.
Okay, so show me. Okay, so just shoot, that's all I got.
So hit that, your thing, and hit the one that comes up, this main screen.
Right.
And there your video is.
Oh, so I don't pick the other, I don't pick the power.
No, I think that's what may have screwed you up last week, because I already have it up and ready for you to go there.
It's the main screen.
Yep. Yeah, it's that one
Right there.
right there. Yep. Yep.
You want me to stand here?
Yeah.
Turn on my.
Okay, so
I thought I had to do it. Don't go around.
okay, just make sure you flip it on and you're good. All right.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
John, were you aware of my feeble attempt to do attendance?
No, but I'm sure you did a good job.
Okay, but I took, the second I logged on, did some, said it, then I realized that a whole bunch of new people had showed up, so I logged back on, and I had a blank set again. Am I supposed to log in twice, or once, or?
So when you,
I don't know where it goes, besides away.
so there's two screens.
Oh, wait a minute, choices.
So you ready for Thanksgiving?
Yeah, they,
So the first one,
alright, so I go to,
Right.
the first
one
one is your first.
Nice.
So let's say.
I agree, yeah, we've done that.
And then see really light there. Because that is on. Yeah, anybody that's online. They're average.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right. 9:42.
You go back in. And they'll hit that down.
Do you have any plans for Thanksgiving?
I don't know, but that's, everybody.
Yeah, that's my wife and I, we've had our two daughters. That's what we're Good morning. Thanks everybody for being here. Let me remind us all that we are streaming live on YouTube, which can be viewed by anybody with an internet connection, live or the recording. Also remind us that we're in rather tight quarters here, and so we appreciate everybody keeping their masks, fully covering their mouth and nose so that we're all can stay safe here. And with that, let's join together for prayer. Gracious God, we long to gather together again with our families and to be healed from the pain of this pandemic. We strive to find grateful hearts amidst the anguish and grief and rancor we see every day. With abounding images of pilgrims and indigenous peoples embracing goodwill and harmony, we pause to reflect on national stories which too often told what we wanted to hear rather than what we needed to hear. We do thank you for these wonderful opportunities for lifelong learning, for fellowship, and for service. With George Ramsey's family and friends, we celebrate the resurrection and call one another to serve you. We are bold to pray because Jesus Christ is Lord. Amen. My great honor to welcome back Dr. Graham Bullard. He is an associate professor of political science at Davidson College, the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, and the director of Davidson in China. He grew up in Washington, D.C. and holds a PhD in environmental science, policy, and management from the University of California at Berkeley, a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, and his undergraduate degree is in ecology and evolutionary biology with a 5-year certificate in East Asian Studies from Princeton University. Graham is married to Sally, an assistant professor of public health at Davidson College, and they have 2 sons. So we are delighted again to welcome Dr. Bullock.
So glad to be back. Good to see you all for a second week to talk about deliberative citizenship. And I do appreciate everyone wearing their masks and wearing them over their noses because I have an unvaccinated kid at home and I'm trying to keep him safe. And I know we all have loved ones that we're trying to keep safe. So thank you for that and for being here for another week of deliberative citizenship. So I'm going to share my screen. I've turned on my mic, and John gave me very precise instructions. So here we are. So back with justice, kindness, and humility. So last week we talked a lot about the challenges of deliberative citizenship and so some concepts and theories associated with it. This week we're going to talk a little more about the possibilities of deliberative citizenship and what we need and what we can do, the sort of the how of practicing justice, kindness, and humility as we are talking with our friends and family members about difficult political and social issues. So we will go on. There we go. So there's Micah, the prophet. You know, as we talked about last week, he was very upset about the injustices that were facing his society. And he communicated that God, the Lord, was very upset and that some bad things are going to happen because of what was going on, particularly from the leaders and religious and political leaders. And that God was going to bring some vengeance. I mean, he uses that word. A lot of anger at that injustice. And yet, what does he propose? What does he suggest the people do? What does the Lord require of us? Not sacrificing your child, not offering sacrifices, not going after vengeance yourself. He's told you, mortal one, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And we talked about last week how there's a connection to deliberative citizenship. We mapped out all those different obstacles, challenges to doing that deliberation. We talked about sort of going through the center of that Venn diagram, as a pathway, as a window to being able to overcome some of those obstacles and to do all of those three things simultaneously, imperfectly, but as persistently as we can. In the work of citizenship, of the work of being on the citizenship. Citizenship as the work people do together to solve the challenges that face society. And particularly the work of deliberation, which, as we talked about, is a structured discourse focused on building both shared and new understandings of a particular issue that transcend previously held positions and enable collective decisions and actions. And I've got a short little video. Hopefully this will work. To summarize the work that we've been doing with the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative. Yep. Yeah, it's just not working. That's okay. So I can summarize. I mean, it's a nice little video. You may have watched it. John sent around the video clip, and he'll send it around again. It's a video introducing the challenges of the DCI of doing deliberation, kind of stuff we've already talked about, and then what we're doing with the initiative. And I should have tested this beforehand, but that's too bad. But it gives us more time to discuss among ourselves. So one of the things it talks about is the DCI's purpose and goal. So the purpose of the DCI is to create opportunities for Davidson students faculty, staff, and members of the wider community to productively engage with one another on difficult and contentious issues facing with our community and society. And it focuses on 5 major goals. So one is teaching deliberative skills, reinforcing humane instincts, building meaningful community, catalyzing creative solutions, and analyzing the deliberative processes of the initiative itself. And as we'll see, these somewhat map to those commandments, those requirements of Micah. I want to kind of focus in a little bit on those humane instincts. So as those of you who know Davidson, it's part of the sort of the mission statement. The statement of purpose is to assist students in developing their humane instincts. So it's one thing we talk about quite a bit. It comes out of the Reformed tradition, the Presbyterian tradition, the Christian tradition, but it also resonates with religious and faith traditions from around the world, and secular ones as well. The Greek cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. Confucian virtues: benevolence, uprightness, knowledge, faithfulness, propriety. The Hindu dharmic virtues: nonviolence, self-restraint, non-covetousness, inner purity, and truthfulness. And of course, these Christian virtues. And you may recognize where these come from. So this is a list from the Bible, and the fruit, what is traditionally known as the fruits of the Spirit. And I think it's actually useful to read the full passage of this description of the fruits of the Spirit, and the context which we're. So starting with, for you are called to freedom, brothers and sisters, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence. Turn that off for a second. As an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love, become slaves to one another. The whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. If, however, you bite and devour one another, remember that a little bit, that imagery from Micah as well, right? He was talking about how the leaders were eating the people, right? Take care that you are not consumed by one another. Live by the Spirit, I say, and do not gratify the desires of the flesh. For what the flesh desires is opposed to the Spirit, and what the Spirit desires is opposed to the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to prevent you from doing what you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not subject to the law. Now the works of the flesh are obvious: fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. I am warning you, as I warned you before, those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. And then this is the fruit of the Spirit. By contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against such things. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also be guided by the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, competing against one another, envying one another. So you get the broader context. It's directly connected to, the golden rule that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that these fruits of the Spirit, in a sense, help us do that, and are also kind of outcomes of it. So, and that these, get back over here. What happens is when you send the video to back here. Okay, so we have these humane instincts, these virtues, these values, and they lead directly into what we call deliberative dispositions. And these dispositions are things we can step into, right? We may, sort of live them daily, but for a lot of us, it takes some intentionality. It takes some, okay, got to take a breath here. I've got to sort of move out of my kind of self-interested, egoistic kind of framework that I usually go about my life with for some good reasons. And I need to step into this new frame of mind, these new dispositions, right? The first is critical. It's a commitment to egalitarianism. It's a recognition and acknowledgement of everyone's right to be in the room, right? That everyone has a voice at the table, a seat at the table, and that no one has more right than someone else. It's also humility, right? Your echo of Micah there, recognizing that I could be wrong. Like, I have some strongly felt opinions. I could be right on a lot of things, but I also could be wrong on them too, right? And being open to that possibility. And then moving critically, not open to that openness, but then an active curiosity. Wow, what do you think? What are the people at this table think? And actively anticipating new ideas, different ideas from my own. And being a little bit excited about that, right? So it's not just a passive openness, it's an active anticipation as well. Then empathy and kindness, trying as incompletely, as imperfectly as we can to be empathetic, right? To try to sit in the other person's seat, to stand in his or her shoes. We can never fully do that, of course. That's where the humility comes in as well, but we can try. And then kindness, showing kindness to one another. Another, you hear Micah there, right? So what is kindness? It's doing something without any expectation of return. And it's also in direct opposition to jealousy. You hear a good thing about someone else and you're not instantly jealous, man, I wish I had that, nice present that they got. No, wow, I'm so happy for you that you got that new job, whatever it is. Charity and grace, going along with that idea, showing charity. So being charitable, someone makes a mistake, says something that maybe is a little bit offensive, right? Not instantly assuming that they are meaning to offend, but showing grace to them, right? Allowing ourselves to make mistakes in these conversations. And then, sort of more kind of content-oriented, focused evidential emphasis, right? That we try to provide reasons to one another. It can be facts, it can be evidence, it can be just stories, narratives, even emotions. But not just stating something like, I think so, and because it is, and not providing some support, some reasoning for your other people at the table to understand where you're coming from. And then a communal orientation, moving beyond our own, sort of personal, self-oriented perspectives to the group, to the community, to society, right? What do we all need? Not just what me and I need, but what all of us need. And of course, we are also part of it, right? But that's, again, having the humility to realize, like, I may not know what is right for everybody, so I need to listen, to be open-minded, etc. Attentiveness, right? So being attentive to everyone in the room and their perspectives. And then an action inclination, and this is also critical. So we often talk about it in the DCI, is foundational to democracy. It's the sort of the lifeblood of democracy. But it's not sufficient for democracy. We need to be able to talk to each other, we need to be able to engage with one another, but then we also need to be able to act together. Remember, citizenship is not just talking, it's solving problems. Now, how we solve them is an open question, right? But I think most, if not all of us, are not satisfied with the status quo, right? Maybe, conservatives in a very broad sense want to move back towards something in the past. Liberals in a very broad sense want to move forward, but they're not really satisfied with how things are right now. We can recognize there's problems that we need to work on together. So talk is critical, it's necessary but not insufficient, and so we can be oriented, inclined towards some kind of action that comes out of our discussions. Now, when and how that happens, also again, an open question, right? It may take time, but at least we have that orientation. Okay, so that's, so we've got our humane instincts, we've got our deliberative dispositions, then we start working on actual agreements that we make before we step into the conversation, right? And this is a critical component. We talked about rules, not having rules last time, right? So these are part of the guidelines to a conversation. Setting up boundaries for how the conversation will go. They also begin to map out skills, deliberative skills, through these agreements. So these are not always easy, and it takes time and practice. So building on these dispositions, as we enter into this discussion, to the best of our ability, we each agree to be authentic and respectful. So speaking from oneself's perspective, and also respecting other people's perspectives as they try to do the same. Being an attentive and active listener. I think that was the first thing we wrote up on the board last time, is not listening. Right, well, this is critical, listening. And active listening. Not, non-verbal language, leaning forward, nodding your head, paying attention, showing, communicating that you're listening. Be a purposeful and concise speaker. So don't wander, don't dominate. Take your amount of time and then create space for others to share as well. Approach fellow deliberators' stories, experiences, and arguments with curiosity, not hostility. Especially when you disagree with them, right? It's like, why? Try to lean, why do they think that? This is so foreign to me. Try to understand more rather than instantly trying to fight it. Assume the best and not the worst about the intentions and values of others, and avoid snap judgments. What that should, remind you of that charity and that grace that we mentioned as a disposition. Demonstrate intellectual humility, recognizing that no one has all the answers by asking questions and making space for others to do the same. Critique the idea we disagree with, not the person expressing it. And remember to practice empathy. Note areas of both agreement and disagreement. And it's critical to have that balance, right? It's not all we're all going to agree on everything. Shouldn't expect or assume that that's going to happen. But also that we don't disagree on everything. We need to find those areas of common ground that we do have. Then respect the confidentiality of the discussion, right? So that helps build the trust in the community that you're building, the relationships that you're building, that people are going to just go immediately post something on social media and say, oh my gosh, Graham said this. Avoid speaking in absolutes. No, all people do. All Democrats, all Republicans, all independents, whatever. No educated person can hold that, right? This is the Scott Aiken and Robert Talese talk about sort of the simple truth hypothesis or thesis. This is a simple truth. Everybody must agree with this, right? Yeah, how could they not? They're just mindless if they don't. Or worse, evil. And what does that do? There might be some truth in it. It might actually be wrong, right? It might actually not be true good selves or whatever. But by saying that, you shut down the conversation. There's no reason to have this conversation. I already know the answer, right? So that's another agreement that we're going to try to avoid those speaking in absolutes. And sometimes we violate these agreements, right? It's hard, right? Sometimes we feel strongly. And that's why having facilitators is really important, right? In these conversations, especially with larger groups, who can remind us of these agreements, can help us step back into those dispositions, and help us, stay communicating with one another. So following up that, then we can, those are agreements. Embedded in there are some deliberative skills, but to kind of make them a little more explicit here. This is from a document that I think I sent around with John, through John, is how to have difficult conversations, and you can read about these in more detail. But the first is obviously listen, right? Don't go into a conversation expecting, this is my opportunity to express myself. Maybe you're going to get to do that, but what you really want to do is learn and listen. And then as you begin to express yourselves, you acknowledge the different perspectives. You say, okay, I hear you, right? Okay, I understand. Is this what you're saying? And then when you begin to express your own perspective using I statements. So, from my perspective, or I think that this, rather than just a statement of fact or a statement of argument, that helps soften the conversation. It expresses a little bit of humility. Although an important caveat here is tone matters a lot. I think, right? I believe, right? Can be too strong, right? So there's a way to moderate it a little, so it does show that humility. Share personal stories, right? Why, to explain why you believe a certain thing, and it helps give some context for why you have a particular perspective on the issue you're talking about, rather than just leaving it with a statement. And then preface strong opposition, right? So before you say, well, I really disagree with that, or that, I can't believe you said that. Okay. Try to warn your interlocutor that you're about to disagree, right? And I've actually got some examples. So this is from that document. Yeah, so this is very personal to me because, and I have strong feelings about it. And then you say, well, or it may not surprise you that I have a completely different perspective on this issue. Or this topic makes me a little emotional because, or because of my experience with, I see this kind of in a completely different way. And then you say, and that helps prepare your interlocutor to see, okay, this is good. I need to pay attention here, right? And they may disagree, or you may disagree with that. The next is avoiding derogatory language, right? So this is an easy one, right? Like name calling, right? Like that's just not helpful, or labels. That's just you're just a socialist, or you're just a racist. That's not really helpful to actually communicate. But the more subtle difference that I think we all probably have done at some point is, sort of dismissive comments that don't rise to the how could anybody think this, right? Explicitly, but things like, well, that's ridiculous, right? Or that's the most crazy idea I've ever heard, right? Or whoever thinks that is crazy and fooling themselves. Or if you believe, that you must be a socialist, fascist, communist, racist, whatever, right? No, it's not to shut down these ideas, right? But it's just how you frame them, right? So, I am concerned that the idea that X, may lead to or have traces of socialism, fascism, communism, racism, right? But you see the difference, right? And it takes some work to do this, and we make these mistakes. I have. And that's, again, facilitators can help us, reframe and help continue the conversation. Because as soon as you start using that language, then what do you think the other side's going to do? right? They go, yeah, I'm a racist, right? I'm a socialist. No, they're gonna shut down, they may leave, right? And then you're worse off than when. And then finally, complete your thought, right? So don't just make a statement, well, clearly that's just wrong, right? Or the facts are the facts. I disagree because X, Y, Z. Or based on what I've learned, what I know, what I've read, I believe X, Y, Z is true. So these are sometimes subtle differences, but they can make a big difference in how we talk about these types of issues. So, turning back to the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, so what we've been doing is trying to host these kind of conversations, right, in two main forms. One are what we call Deliberative Forums, where we have, these are one-time events, you can show up, no commitments, you've been doing them online, you register, you get a guide sent to you to learn about that issue. And we've been having panels of experts to start the conversation with diverse perspectives to kind of warm people up, get people on the same page, and then to go into breakout rooms with the facilitator to talk about that issue. The second form is what we call deliberative D teams, which are groups of small groups of 5 to 10 people who get together multiple times. Right now it's 3 times a semester to talk about a range of different topics over once a month, again, with a facilitator. And those facilitators have been trained by the DCI. They're either our fellows, students, staff, faculty, or alums of Davidson, who are in a year-long program to kind of engage with deliberative theory and practice. And they go through a training, an 8-hour training program to learn how to facilitate. We also have facilitators who've gone through that training. They're not necessarily currently, they might be former fellows, they might have done the training, and then we call on them to sometimes help, particularly with the deliberative forums, because we have a limited number of fellows who can facilitate. So that they play a really critical role in this process. So here's just some photos. So this is a snapshot of our panel from our housing deliberative forum back in this spring. And we had experts from around Charlotte and North Carolina talk about housing from a range of different perspectives: academics, nonprofit organizations, community organizations, think tanks. And you see me there, and Katie McNamara, who's a student, who's a fellow, a student co-convener of the DCI, and we were hosting that conversation before we opened it up for the over 100 people who participated in the event to go in their breakout rooms and talk with each other. And we got really positive feedback about that event. These are our current fellows and some of our faculty actually participating in our training program for facilitation this past fall. And here they're doing a kind of mock deliberation. And then this is actually from last week, some students who in an ethics and policymaking course that I'm teaching with Professor Dan Lehman, and we have a deliberation component to the course. And last week they were hosting their own deliberations on a range of topics. And here they are deliberating. So, and we've gotten really good feedback so far. So the DCI is a wonderful addition to the Davidson campus and community. I've been a part of a D team for 2 semesters, and I cannot speak highly enough of my experience. The entire program was very thoughtfully designed, well attended, and it created a space that ignited extraordinary conversations. I've attended many housing forums lately, and last night was one of the most productive by far. And finally, you may know Lynette Popovich. She said the DCI has allowed me to have more confidence in terms of reaching out to people with whom I don't agree. Oops. So I don't agree, so that we can have those conversations. Not that minds will be changed, but I will have a better understanding, and hopefully the other party will feel like they've been heard. So some good feedback, but I'm the first to say, like, we do not have a silver bullet. There are a lot of remaining challenges, and we're open to sort of ideas for how to continue to improve, and for experiments to happen at DCPC and elsewhere. And we've had some great conversations with John and Peter and Pam, about these things. So Pam is on our advisory council for the DCI, and so hope that all of you will consider getting involved and also coming up with your own approaches. But I thought I would take a moment to sort of return to some of those obstacles that we mapped out last time, right? There's a lot up here on the board, remember? And how we have tried to sort of navigate them, right? So, and I tried to organize them by these kind of principles from Micah. So starting with humility or lack of humility. So disagreement on facts. So it's like, I got the facts, you don't got the facts, right? That's a little bit not very humble, right? So that's one, and we could put these in any of these boxes, but this is how I try to organize it for today. One is not listening. I'm right? What do I need to listen, to? And I actually heard Rush Limbaugh say this on the radio once. It's like, said a caller called, he said, we need to talk with Democrats. He's like, no, like I know, I don't need to do that. Right?
You only heard it once.
Yeah, well, I don't listen to that. But I think, I think some, there's people on the progressive side who feel the same way, that they don't need to listen to stuff, and they don't want to. They want to actually actively deplatform, perspectives they don't agree with. So that's not, the sort of pinnacle of humility. The difficulty of reasoning. You remember that one? There's a lot of kind of drivers there, but one is like a difficulty because I'm not willing to reason. Right? Like I don't want to take the time to express myself, my arguments, because I have the truth of it. And then an orientation towards particular identities. My tribe, my party, my perspective, is the end all be all. So why engage, right? And that also is not that humble. Lack of justice. So we talked about status quo bias, right? So not, sort of thinking about the injustices in the world and how we can overcome them. The presence of inequalities and power differentials and not being attentive to them. The lack of clear rules, right? To, sort of map out boundaries and call out and identify violations of those rules in a conversation, right? That there can be injustices that happen right there in the conversation. So that's an issue. And then lack of kindness or mercy, right? So, not leaning in, we all may have different values, but leaning into a shared sense, shared commitment to kindness and mercy. Fear, right? Letting fear overwhelm our commitment to kindness and mercy. Different levels of commitment to the process, right? So, and that is not, sort of demonstrating a deep commitment to kindness and mercy. And then finally, a lack of creative thinking of how can we be kind in the face of real disagreement, right? How do we do that? Very, very hard. But it also convinces a lack of thinking creatively about that question. Okay, so how have we, remember that was a lot, right? It's a lot here last week. So how have we tried to address some of these things? So the first is setting the table, right? Even before we step in to the conversation, we send out this deliberation guide, which is out there, and then deliberating together, and then finally at the end, orienting citizens. So this deliberation guide helps with disagreement over facts because it tries to lay out, some baseline statistics and perspectives on the issue. It also provides those different perspectives, so it helps with the reasoning, right? Because you've read it, you've engaged before even coming into the conversation with those different ideas. And it also maybe pushes us away from the status quo bias because it highlights the injustice, highlights the problem, and that we need to do something about it. Deliberative dispositions, what we talked about today, leaning into not to listening, to reasoning, to thinking about the diversity of values that we should be trying to take on in the conversation. Conversation agreements we went through, so that can also help with the difficulty of reasoning with. I mean, these arrows, I try to limit myself to how many arrows. I could have arrows to all of them, but the primary one. So, but the lack of clear rules. Remember we talked about that? Well, the conversation agreements provide those rules. And then, you know, it can also address the fear factor because we have rules. We know what, when a facilitator is going to step in and, you know, help the conversation. So trained facilitators can deal with inequalities, power differentials. Somebody's talking a lot, right? Dominating the conversation. Thank you very much, Pam. That's great. But I really want to hear from someone else, right? Today. So what do other people think about this issue? And then promoting creative thinking, right? How, you know, sort of like, okay, guys, let's push ourselves here. We've got these disagreements. How can we transcend our original positions? An engaging process that can help with the different levels of community. We make it engaging, we make it even fun, right? That you're doing this for 2 hours and you didn't know how the time went by because it was so, you know, well structured and dynamic, right? And it's not like a town hall meeting which you're, you know, bored to tears at, you know, at 10 o'clock at night. Focus on normative, not empirical questions. So sometimes there are disagreements on facts, right? And so instead of letting that become a stalemate and, you know, people throwing their facts at each other, let's show some grace. I'm sure, okay, well, let's assume you're right about that. What are the implications? What do we do with that? And then, okay, what if I'm right? Right? What are the implications? So moving from the empirical debate to more normative questions. Moral foundations theory. So this is this idea that we have, like, you know, we all share sort of some more basic moral foundations, but that we have different preferences. We have our experiences have led us to focus on particular moral foundations, and others, you know, different ones. You know, so some may focus more on fairness, others on kindness or compassion. And then, you know, that's where, you know, some of the disagreements come from. But if we recognize that we actually do share some of the basic foundations, and it's just some differences in emphasis, that might help. Opportunities to practice, right? So the other dimension of the difficulty of reasoning is it's hard, right? It's not easy, you know, to sort of think through very systematically what your reasons for your position are. But this space, these places enable us to practice doing that. Sense of community, developing a sense of a team. We're on the same team here. It's a deliberative team, right? And promoting that sense of belonging can help with the fear, right? That commitment to confidentiality can help with the fear factor. And then finally, we, at the end of each D team or deliberative forum, we send out what we call pathway guides. And these are to provide a list of different things you can do after the deliberation. You can learn more, you can get connected with different organizations, you can take action. And they're very nonpartisan, providing a range of different perspectives and organizations. But it's this idea, don't stop at the end. That's really the beginning of working on that topic. So those are some of the things we're trying to do to address some of those, you know, genuine concerns that I shared and we talked about last week. And so, and that they can help us get to that middle, right? You know, through that window. You know, how do we balance justice, mercy, and humility in these conversations? And so some resources that I can send around again with John. So one is our website, but there are other organizations working on this as well. Braver Angels, Living Room Conversations, National Issues Forum, Baylor University's Public Deliberation Initiative. They have actually a faith and deliberation program. And each of these provide their own guides, their own tips, their own training materials and opportunities that you can try out beyond what we're doing here at DCI. So suggestions. So one is signing up, right? So there's like there's a cliche about the first step of engagement is showing up. But I actually say the first step is signing up. Right? And then you gotta show up, right? So sign up for one of our spring D teams, come to some of our spring deliberative forums, and sign up on our website for updates. There's at the bottom of every page, you can sign up for updates. And then encourage your friends and family to do so as well. And then host your own deliberations, right? You don't have to depend on us, right? I can send around, we've got a guide to one-on-one conversations that you can host with your family over the holidays. You can use Living Room Conversations, has some great little resources, so does National Interest Forum. You can do it in a formal way like we're talking about now, or in a more informal way. But those are some ideas, to do this important work that I think, Micah and Jesus and our society call us to do. So that's that. And then we've got some time, to ask questions and discuss. Does this make sense? What are some other ideas you have, or what resonated with any of you? So I will turn off the screen share, so Beth can see us and our online friends can see us. Yeah. So
What are the origins of this? Is this something you and Carol or somebody cooked up, or is it part of a national movement with Davidson's name on it, or what?
yeah, so great question. So a little bit all of the above. So it is part of a how do you say, national. And I actually have a student, an honor student in political science, working on this question right now. Deliberative democracy as a social movement, and it really emerged in early 90s as an idea in scholarly literature, but then it's become a thing that is practiced not only in the United States but around the world. This idea of deliberation as a important component of democracy, and it's on a lot of college campuses, but also in community organizations, and there are a lot of examples in government. So one thing called Participatory Budget, for example, is something that's out there where citizens can get together and deliberate about a part of a city budget, and then they get to decide, through a deliberative process, what part of that budget will go to. So it is part of a bigger thing, but it does have local origins. So several of us a couple years ago got together, some faculty, Dan Hillard, who's the director of the writing program, myself, Byron McRae, who's the dean of student life, Stacy Reamer, director of our Center for Civic Engagement. All had sort of been working on this in a lot of different ways, like in the classroom and in other contexts, and we sort of came together and created this initiative. And it was right before, this is like the semester before the pandemic, and we met with like over 60 other faculty, staff, students, and there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm about doing it. And we did a training program in January, February of 2020, and we're about to host a big event that in April, and that didn't happen. But then we got a grant from the Duke Endowment to do this work, and we decided, despite the pandemic, despite the challenging election environment, despite all the racial tensions that were emerging that summer, that we needed to do this. And actually, because of all those issues, we needed to do it. And so we did it all online for the last year, and we're slowly starting to do more in person. So does that help?
Yeah. Graham, do you see this as a core requirement of all Davidson students?
Not right now. It's
Would that be a
completely voluntary, and it's something we're trying to encourage students to do. It's hard to. I certainly would like to see all of our students do something with these guys. That would be great, or something similar, or having taken a course that it has a deliberation component to it. Requirement is another sort of thing, right? Like that. I mean, as soon as you start requiring things, then you have pushback, and then they, just because it's required, they don't think it. So more of a sort of voluntary effort, and embedding it in different parts of the institution is what we're working on. So we have 10 Davidson faculty in a deliberative pedagogy collaborative right now. They're working on ways in which they're trying to embed deliberation into their courses across the curriculum. So that's one thing we're working on. And we've got, a bunch of student fellows from across the institution that we're working with. They're brainstorming, working about ways we can do this creatively, dynamically on campus. So, and then we've been engaging alumni a lot too. And that's one of the benefits of Zoom and the pandemic, is that we've enabled so many people we're not local to Davidson to participate. So
I understand the requirement issue. I've dealt with required physical education for 40 years.
Yeah, I know that story, right? Yeah, definitely. So how to encourage them to want to be there, to do it is a real challenge. So yeah.
Give us some examples of what the students have taken as a topic to discuss.
Yeah, so let's see. So just to take our deliberative forums last year. So we did elections and voting, the future of democracy. We did reforming the Supreme Court, and we did housing in Charlotte. So we try to sort of do a range of both kind of local issues and national ones. This year, we just did one on a deliberative forum on free speech and inclusion on college campuses in particular. And in February, we're going to be doing a forum on economic mobility and the American dream. Just to give you a sense, so in my class, ethics and policymaking, we gave the students a choice. Like they came up with ideas on their own, what they wanted. It had to be related to policymaking. Could be a topic we already did in class. They picked, things like guns in America, affirmative action, critical race theory, and more. So they're not shying away. We're trying not to shy away from hard topics, right? But also, sort of layering them a little bit too as we go. So, and we've done legacies of slavery, we've done policing, we've done healthcare, we've done COVID, we've done environmental issues like climate change in D team context as well. So we've got guides now on all of those, 10 plus different programs. And we're actually going to be creating a new membership program you could all sign up for, that will give you access, free membership, to all those documents so that you could use them. You just sign up, and you could use them yourselves. And we're going to be rolling that out over the break. So that's one thing I'm doing. Yeah.
Graham, I'm going to speak from my own experience. I was on a D team last spring.
Yeah.
And we had 2 community members, 3 students, and a facilitator. And I purposefully signed up for people with different views than mine. But a couple of interesting observations. One, when we got together, we didn't seem to have that many differences. So I don't know how you choose people. It's difficult to assess what goes on. The other thing that struck me was the difference in perspectives from the student view and my view some 50 years later. And I remember being a student in phase, and it was real interesting to see how those came together or did not come together.
Yeah, so great. So I'm glad you had that experience. And on the 2 points, so one is on the second point. So I think that's one piece of feedback we've gotten, a positive piece of feedback, that there has been that diversity, right, of intergenerational connections. Alums or community members being able to hear from students, and for students to be able to connect with and hear from older adults has been really valuable. And the students have said, they really value it because they don't have those kind of conversations very much, like beyond with their professors or their parents, who there's a power differential, or just they're not always treated equally, right? Or they don't feel like they're treated. But in the D team, they are, right? Everyone is supposed to be, have equal status, and so that they can represent themselves in that context. So that's been a positive thing. The hard thing, you're right, is that, 2 things. So one is that, so there's we could have greater diversity of perspectives of people signing up. To how we choose. It's also people choosing to come, right? So we can't make people. We're not making people come, and so we could have greater demographic diversity. We could also have greater ideological diversity, and how do we create a space where people feel safe, people can trust each other to be able to share their genuine perspectives, and that's what we're working on. We're trying to sort of, get the word out first of all, that people know about it, and then know about what it is. This is not a place where you're going to get attacked, for your views, and that you can learn from others. And so that
The only guide you got is the profile that we provide you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all you've got to choose who these
Yeah.
people are.
Yeah, and so we tried, and we're trying, but that, like I said, I don't have a silver bullet, like I can't make people show up, and there's just a lot of hesitation out there, in this polarized context. And so, but we're also always trying to innovate, so that the team that you call bridge builder teams, trying to sort of encourage people to come and bring some, so you sign up and you should invite someone who's different from you, right? And that helps. Or bring a friend, right? So if you're, worried like you're the only person with your identity who's going to be in the room, whether it's like you're an athlete or Asian American or whatever, well, invite someone else who you feel comfortable with to participate with you in this process, and that can help you feel a greater sense of community and trust. So, but it's a challenge, but we're working on it. I saw some other hands, yeah.
Many states are outlawing the teaching of critical race theory. Would that itself be something that undermines deliberative citizenship, if control of what facts we can consider?
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what the content is, if we start banning particular ideas, or threatening to cancel them, socially, economically, for expressing them, then that contributes to this concern that people aren't going to act and deliberate with one another. We kind of regress to what I talked about last week, aggregative democracy, where we just vote and call it a day. We don't actually talk and try to explore each other, or works, sort of resorting to kind of power. Either implicit or explicit way. So, and so I think, yeah, any efforts to sort of shut down, particular ideas are challenging, right? And the nuance, the challenge is, how do we do that? How do we not do that while also continue our commitment to egalitarianism, right? And that people have a right to express their different perspectives. So I don't know if that helps. So like I said, students engage with critical race theory directly, right, last week, and so and it was an interesting conversation. But yeah, so
It seems to me that the character of the facilitator is pretty critical.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure how that applies to the Thanksgiving table.
yes. The character. So that's a big word, right? So I think we have an assumption that these dispositions can be learned, right? So that maybe some of us are naturally a little better at them, right? We have personalities or character that makes it a little easier, but that doesn't mean that all of us can't improve. It can't be better, myself particularly included, right? And then so it takes practice, to do that work.
But they have to be agreed to or recognized.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got 4 days.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're working on some experiments. So it's a little bit like slow food versus fast food, right? So it's hard, the informal method of doing it. So let's just have a nice little celebration right now, like our family, right? Let's talk about it. But that's risky, if you don't set the table a little bit, and so, but we're experimenting with ways to do that. So One is like, sort of sharing some agreements beforehand, right? Before Thanksgiving, before the holidays. Having a little like paper on the, on the table, like we're thinking about this for like comments or something like, where, here's the conversation agreements on one side, there's deliberative dispositions on the other, right? And like, before you start, we can talk about politics, right? Lean into those agreements and those dispositions. So on the placemat, but the point here is like, how can we be courageous and creative at the same time, rather than just like shying away, and the guide I talk about too is being strategic too. Like, don't pick that relative, that uncle that you're so estranged with from, and it's really hard and open wound, right? That don't start with the hardest one, right? Start with one that's a little easier, that maybe you see some openness, openings there, and you can talk about what we're doing, right? Like, and I'll refer you, I sent around the article that was on the Davidson website. Katie McNamara is highlighted there, and how she, had a lot of, tense conversations with her family. But being a part of the BCI really changed her approach, her disposition when she returned home and had these conversations. And then people were like, what? Like, who are you? Like, their family's like, who are you? And where did my daughter go? And like, so, it can have, effects in ways that we don't even predict. So I saw some other, yeah.
It's helpful to emphasize that the purpose is not to change someone's mind, but just to listen and understand how the other person thinks.
Yes.
So you're not in there to come to a conclusion of who's right, who's wrong. So I don't need to, when someone else is talking, try to figure out what I have to say next.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So listening does not imply agreement, right? So that's a key point, right? And listening with strength is important, right? Like that you don't have to react, just because somebody says something, doesn't mean you have to like immediately respond. You say, okay, I hear you, right? That's I think that you can even, this is what you think, this is why you think it, okay, right? And then would you like to hear what I think? Right? So you learned from the experience, right? And I've actually, someone was telling me just like that you were in the conversation. So maybe 10 days or 2 months later, they come back and say, I was really thinking about what you said. I would like to continue that. Right? That's happened. We heard a story about that, and so, patience, right? Another virtue, is important here too. Sometimes this takes time. How long, remember from last week, how many years did Dorothy in Rwanda wait for the person who killed her son to come to her door? 10 years. 10 years of patience, So it's hard, right? That takes fortitude, takes resilience, but that's part of this work. So on the other hand, yeah.
Are the new teams still meeting via Zoom, or are they beginning to come together personally?
We had planned.
That would be a different dynamic.
Yes, we had planned to do mostly in person this fall, but we gave people choices. And we had more than ever before, but most were still on online. Most people didn't, and a lot were alums who were not in Davidson. But we're hoping in the spring we can move to more in person, and that will obviously be different and in some ways better. Yeah. So I just have one more last slide to share that to just wrap this up because we're at time. So, but I just wanted to share this one thing, and I better put this on. So connecting, and this is just the 30 seconds. So connecting Micah to the Beatitudes, thinking the final 4 Beatitudes is connecting to Micah's great commandment. So blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. That Micah requirement of justice, of doing justice. Blessed are the merciful, for they will show mercy. They will be shown mercy. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Walk humbly with the Lord. And the next beatitude, critically, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. So this work of deliberation, this work of facilitation is in part the work of peacemaking, of, bringing people together, helping people balance these different requirements of justice, mercy, and humility. And I hope we can all work on it both individually and together. And so I'd love to continue this conversation, and I hope you all will, lean into this work and participate in DCI activities in the future. So thank you for your time, and Grant. Yeah.
Those students who are looking at law and maybe get some.
Yeah. I wish you well. Yeah. He is
Yeah.